I was 89 seconds away from my house when the neighbor called. Her voice shook through the speaker. Something about construction equipment and police needed now. I pressed the accelerator down, but kept it under 40. Cops don't speed off duty, even when adrenaline dumps ice into your bloodstream, even when your training screams that someone's crossed a line they can't uncross. My jaw locked as I turned onto Meadowbrook Drive. That's when the yellow Caterpillar Bulldozer came into view, diesel smoke curling into the autumn air, parked half on my lawn. The contractor's truck sat behind it, hazards blinking. I scanned for permits, for county vehicles, for anything official. Nothing. Just my east wall, the one with Sophie's height marks penciled inside, reduced to scattered brick and splintered 2x4s. The machine idled, its blade still raised, dust hanging in the air like evidence. And standing 20 feet back on the sidewalk, clipboard pressed to her chest like a shield, was Jeanette Crowley, 8-year HOA president, neighborhood enforcer. She wasn't running, wasn't calling anyone, just watching my house come apart. Her expression somewhere between satisfaction and entitlement. If you're watching this from somewhere dealing with HOA nightmares, drop a comment below. You're not alone. She didn't flinch when I stopped the car, didn't move when I stepped out. Badge already in my hand. What Jeanette Crowley didn't know, what none of them standing there knew, was that I'm not just another homeowner she could bully into compliance. I'm Detective Evan Calder, Denver PD Financial Crimes Unit, and I've spent 12 years following paper trails that people like her think they've burned. This one was about to lead straight back to her door. The bulldozer operator saw my badge before he saw my face. His hand jerked toward the ignition, killing the engine. The sudden silence hit harder than the noise had, leaving only the settling dust and the distant hum of traffic on Arapahoe Road. I walked forward with measured steps, the kind that don't invite conversation or excuses, the kind I use when I'm about to ask questions that don't have good answers. Gabe Lormont climbed down from the cab, work gloves dangling from his belt, his face already doing that thing people's faces do when they realize they've made a mistake they can't unmake. He was mid-30s, construction tan, wearing a company shirt with his name stitched above the pocket. Behind him, my house looked like something out of a war zone. The entire east wall was gone. Not damaged. Gone. I could see straight through to the kitchen, to the table where Sophie and I ate breakfast 6 hours ago, to the cabinet where Sarah's coffee mug still sat on the second shelf because I couldn't bring myself to move it. I stopped 3 feet from Lormont, close enough to make him uncomfortable, far enough to keep this professional. My voice came out level, controlled, the same tone I use in interview rooms when I already know someone's lying. Permit, I said. Not a question, a demand. Lormont's Adam's apple bobbed. He pulled a folded paper from his back pocket, his hands shaking just enough to betray him. I took it without breaking eye contact, then looked down. It was an email, printed, no county seal, no notary stamp, no permit number, just a message from an address labeled HOA office, instructing Lormont Excavation to proceed with demolition of the structure at 4212 Meadowbrook Drive, effective immediately, authorized by the Homeowners Association Board. I looked up. This isn't a permit. This is an email. Lormont's mouth opened, closed. Ms. Crowley said she'd handle the paperwork. She said it was all approved, that the house was in violation, and the board voted to. When did the board vote? He blinked. I don't know. She just said, "Show me the resolution." Silence. Lormont looked past me, toward Jeanette, like a drowning man looking for a lifeline that wasn't coming. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes on him, watching the exact moment he understood he'd been used. You demolished a structure without a county permit, I said quietly. That's criminal mischief under Colorado revised statutes. Class 2 misdemeanor. You're looking at losing your contractor's license. His face went white. I didn't know. She said, "What Miss Crowley said doesn't matter. What matters is that you operated heavy machinery on private property without legal authorization." I folded the email and slipped it into my jacket pocket. "Don't move this equipment. Don't leave this site. I'm calling the county sheriff." I walked back toward my car, pulling out my phone. But my eyes tracked to Jeanette. She hadn't moved from her spot on the sidewalk. 52 years old. Silver hair cut in a sharp bob, wearing a cream-colored blazer and dark slacks, like she were dressed for a board meeting instead of overseeing destruction. Her clipboard was still pressed against her chest. She was smiling, not broadly, just a small, controlled curve of her lips that said she thought she'd already won. I stopped 10 feet away from her, phone still in my hand. "Ms. Crowley?" My voice carried across the lawn, steady and cold. She tilted her head slightly, that smile never wavering. "Officer Calder, I'm sorry you had to come home to this, but the board made its decision. Your property has violated community covenants for months. We sent multiple notices." "Show me the notices. They're on file at the HOA office. Show me the board resolution authorizing demolition." Her smile thinned, just slightly. "That's internal HOA business. We don't have to disclose Colorado Revised Statutes 38-33.3-317. HOA records are available to homeowners within 7 business days of request. I'm requesting now." Jeanette's clipboard lowered an inch. Behind her, I saw movement. Cliff Morgan, her second in command, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetually nervous expression, was stepping out of a black SUV parked 2 houses down. He'd been watching, waiting. Jeanette's voice dropped, losing its polite veneer. "Mr. Calder, you need to understand something. This neighborhood has standards, rules. Your house has been bringing down property values. The board has a responsibility. The board has a responsibility to follow the law." I kept my tone flat, professional, but every word landed like a gavel. "You authorized demolition without a county permit. You used HOA funds to hire a contractor for what appears to be personal retaliation. And unless you can produce a signed, notarized board resolution right now, you've just committed criminal mischief and fraud." For the first time, something flickered behind her eyes. Not fear, not yet, but recognition. The recognition that I wasn't going to back down, wasn't going to be intimidated, wasn't going to be another name on her list of people she'd bullied into selling their homes and leaving. She straightened, lifting her chin. "You can file whatever complaints you want. Detective, the HOA has an attorney. We'll see you in court." She turned and walked toward Cliff's SUV, heels clicking on the pavement with the kind of confidence that comes from 8 years of unchecked power. I watched her go, then turned back to my house. The dust was settling now, revealing the full scope of the damage. Insulation hung from broken studs. Electrical wires dangled like severed nerves. And buried somewhere in that rubble was a small wooden box, the one Sarah had kept her journals in, the one I'd promised myself I'd give to Sophie when she was older. I pulled out my phone and dialed the Arapahoe County Sheriff's Office. My voice was calm, almost detached, as I reported the incident, gave my badge number, and requested an investigator. While I waited for the callback, I opened my camera app and started documenting. Every angle, every broken beam, every piece of evidence that would matter when this went to court, because it was going to court. Jeanette Crowley had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She'd assumed I was just another homeowner, another obstacle, another person who'd fold under pressure. What she didn't know was that I'd spent 12 years taking down white-collar criminals who thought they were smarter than the system. People who hid behind corporations and shell companies and falsified documents. People who believed their power made them untouchable. I'd put 6 of them in federal prison. Jeanette Crowley was about to become number 7. My phone buzzed. Sophie, texting from school. "Dad, Aunt Claire said something happened at the house. Are you okay?" I looked at the wreckage one more time, then typed back, keeping my voice steady, even through text. "Everything's fine. Sweetheart, stay at Aunt Claire's tonight. Dad has something to take care of." I hit send, then turned back to the rubble. Somewhere in the distance, I heard sirens. The envelope arrived by courier at 7:30 a.m., exactly 24 hours after the bulldozer. I was already awake, sitting at my kitchen table with a laptop and 3 folders of printed HOA documents I'd pulled from the county recorder's office the night before. Sophie was still at her aunt's house. The investigator from the sheriff's office had come and gone, taking statements, photographing the damage, issuing Lormont a citation. Now it was my turn to build the case that mattered. The courier required a signature. I signed, closed the door, and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter on Meadowbrook Heights HOA letterhead, formatted like a legal document, but lacking any actual legal authority. It listed 14 violations of community covenants. Paint color is non-compliant. Fence height exceeds the maximum allowance. Lawn maintenance is inadequate. Driveway cracks are visible from the street. Each violation carried a fine. The total came to $12,000. At the bottom, in bold print, a threat dressed up as policy. Failure to remit payment within 10 business days will result in enforcement action up to and including lien placement or alternative remedies as determined by the board. I read it twice, then set it down and cross-referenced every claim against my property records. Paint color, coastal gray, approved on the HOA's own list from 2019. I had the email confirmation in my files. Fence height, 5 feet 8 inches, measured last summer when I replaced the back gate. The maximum allowed height was 6 feet according to the registered covenants. Lawn maintenance, handled by the same service Jeanette herself used, a detail I'd noticed 6 months ago when their truck was parked in her driveway. Every single violation was fabricated. Not exaggerated, not subjective. Fabricated. I picked up my phone and called the HOA office. 3 rings. Then, Cliff Morgan's voice, clipped and professional in a way that sounded rehearsed. Meadowbrook Heights HOA. How can I help you? This is Evan Calder. I received your letter. I'm requesting copies of all board meeting minutes related to the violations cited, as well as the resolution authorizing enforcement action. Silence. Then, Mr. Calder, the board's decision is final. You can file an appeal at the next quarterly meeting. When's the next meeting? February. 3 months away. I kept my voice level. Colorado Revised Statutes 38-33.3-317 requires you to provide meeting minutes within 7 days of a homeowner's request. I'm making that request now. Cliff's tone shifted, losing the professional polish. Those are internal documents. The board doesn't have to. The statute says otherwise. I'll expect them by next Friday. If I don't receive them, I'll file a formal complaint with the county and copy the Colorado Attorney General's office. I hung up before he could respond. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the county's property records database. I spent the next 2 hours walking the neighborhood with my phone, photographing every house within 3 blocks. 17 properties had paint colors that weren't on the approved list. 9 had fences over 6 feet. At least a dozen had lawns in worse condition than mine. None of them had violation notices posted. None of them had letters threatening $12,000 fines. I checked the HOA's public records to see who attended Jeanette's monthly barbecues, the ones she hosted every 3rd Saturday. Cross-referenced the addresses. Every single property with violations was owned by someone on that list. By noon, I had a pattern. By 2 p.m., I had a timeline. Jeanette had been targeting properties owned by people who didn't attend her events, didn't donate to her preferred causes, and didn't vote the way she wanted on board issues. It wasn't about covenants. It was about control. I saved everything to a cloud drive, backed it up on an external hard drive, and then printed copies from my case file. At 4 p.m., I drove back to the neighborhood entrance, where a large community bulletin board stood under a covered pavilion. The board was supposed to display meeting notices, upcoming events, and official HOA communications. I photographed everything posted there, then compared it to the archived notices I'd pulled from the county. My name appeared on a violation warning list dated 4 months ago. I'd never received any warning. No letter, no email, no door hanger. But there it was, posted publicly. My address listed alongside 3 others under a header that read, "Properties under review for covenant compliance." I took close-ups of the date stamp, the signature at the bottom, Jeanette's looping handwriting, and the HOA seal that looked official but had never been registered with the county. Then I went home and pulled up the original covenants document filed with Arapahoe County in 2012, the year the HOA was established. I compared it line by line with the amended version Jeanette had sent with her violation letter. 9 differences. 9 clauses that had been changed, tightened, or added without proper procedure. Under Colorado law, any amendment to HOA covenants requires a vote of the membership, notarization, and filing with the county. None of that had happened. Jeanette had simply rewritten the rules, printed them on official letterhead, and enforced them as if they were law. I was building a spreadsheet of discrepancies when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You should stop while you can. This won't end well for you." I stared at it for 10 seconds, then forwarded it to my work email and saved a screenshot. Intimidation via text message. Potential witness tampering if this ever got to trial. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a new document and started drafting a formal complaint to the Colorado Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. HOA fraud fell under their jurisdiction. So did embezzlement. If I could prove Jeanette was misusing funds. I was 3 paragraphs in when I heard a car door slam outside. I looked out the window. Jeanette's silver Lexus was parked across the street. She was standing on the sidewalk, phone to her ear, staring directly at my house. She wasn't hiding. Wasn't pretending she just happened to be in the neighborhood. She wanted me to see her, wanted me to know she was watching. I stood up, walked to the door, and stepped outside. She lowered her phone, but didn't move, didn't speak, just held my gaze with that same cold confidence she'd had yesterday. The kind that comes from years of getting away with things, from a system that had never held her accountable. I stayed on my porch, arms crossed, and stared back. 10 seconds. 20. Finally, she got back in her car and drove away. I waited until her taillights disappeared around the corner, then went back inside and added a new line to my case file. Surveillance and intimidation. October 9th, 4:47 p.m. Witness, myself. I was about to close the laptop when an email came through. The subject line read, "You need to see this." The sender was an address I didn't recognize, but the domain was local. I opened it. Attached was a single PDF, a copy of an email chain from 2022, internal HOA correspondence. Jeanette's name was at the top. The message was short. "If they don't comply, we'll make their lives hell until they sell." I sat back, reading it 3 more times. Then I checked the metadata. The file had been forwarded from an account belonging to Lydia Penrose, a member of the HOA board I'd seen at meetings but never spoken to. Someone on the inside was starting to crack. I spent 40 minutes on the phone with a technical sales rep at Best Buy, asking questions I already knew the answers to, making sure the equipment I was about to purchase would hold up in court. Nest outdoor IQ cameras, cloud storage with timestamp and GPS verification, tamper alerts, night vision. Everything is admissible under Colorado's single-party consent laws for video surveillance on private property. I bought 6 units, paid for expedited shipping, then drove to a hardware store in Littleton, 2 towns over, where nobody knew my name or my address. I needed to keep this quiet until the cameras were operational. By 6 p.m., the cameras were mounted. 4 covered the perimeter of what remained of my house. 1 aimed at the driveway. 1 pointed directly at the street with a clear view of anyone approaching the property. Each feed streamed to my phone and laptop, backed up to the cloud every 60 seconds. If anyone came near my property again, I'd have proof that couldn't be disputed or destroyed. The next morning, I put on my badge and drove to the Arapahoe County Sheriff's Office substation on Havana Street. I wasn't there as a victim. I was there as a cop filing a formal complaint. The deputy who took my statement was younger than me, maybe late 20s, with the kind of earnest focus that told me he hadn't been worn down yet by bureaucracy and politics. I walked him through everything: the unauthorized demolition, the fabricated violations, the threatening text. He typed it all into the system, his expression darkening as I laid out the timeline. When I finished, he looked up. "You said you're a detective, Denver PD, financial crimes." He nodded slowly. "This feels organized, like she's done it before." "She has." I slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printouts of 3 other properties in Meadowbrook Heights that had been sold in the past 2 years after extended disputes with the HOA. I'd pulled the sales records that morning. All 3 had sold below market value. All 3 had new owners who attended Jeanette's barbecues. The deputy flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening. "I'll escalate this to investigations. We'll contact the contractor, verify his statement, and issue a formal report. It'll take a few days." "That's fine. I'm not going anywhere." I left the substation and drove straight to the county administration building downtown. 3rd floor, recorder's office. I filled out a Colorado Open Records Act request form, checking boxes for every document related to Meadowbrook Heights HOA over the past 5 years, building permits, demolition permits, complaints filed with the county, contracts between the HOA and outside vendors. The clerk looked at the form, then at me. "This is going to be a lot of paper. I'll pay for copies." She shrugged and stamped the request. "We'll have it ready in 7 business days." I thanked her and left. 7 days were longer than I wanted, but it was progress. By the time I got back to my car, my phone buzzed. An email notification. The county had already uploaded some public records to its portal. I pulled over in the parking lot and opened the files on my phone. Permit records for the past 3 years. I scrolled through, cross-referencing addresses. Lormont Excavation had completed 11 jobs in Meadowbrook Heights since 2021. All 11 had been approved directly by Jeanette Crowley. No competitive bidding. No board votes were documented in the meeting minutes I'd been able to access online, just her signature on the contracts. I opened a new note on my phone and started building a list. Lormont wasn't the only contractor getting repeat business. A landscaping company called Greenscape Solutions had 14 contracts. A paving company, Mountain Ridge Asphalt, had 9. Every single one was approved solely by Jeanette. I made a note to pull business registrations for each company, see who owned them, and check for any family connections or financial links back to Jeanette. If she were taking kickbacks, there'd be a trail. There always was. By noon, I was back home, reviewing footage from the new cameras. Nothing unusual yet. A few neighbors walking dogs. A delivery truck is dropping off a package 3 houses down. Then, at 2:17 a.m., something changed. The timestamp on the driveway camera showed a black SUV pulling up to the curb. No headlights. The driver's door opened, and Cliff Morgan stepped out. He looked around, nervous, checking over his shoulder twice before approaching my front door. He didn't knock. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket and taped it to the door, just above the peephole. Then he got back in the SUV and drove away. I rewound the footage, zoomed in, and captured a clear frame of his face. Then I went to the front door and retrieved the paper. It was another notice, printed on HOA letterhead. Final notice: vacate property within 72 hours or face legal action. No signatures, no case numbers, no court orders, just a threat designed to intimidate someone who didn't know better. I photographed it front and back, documented the timestamp, then added it to my evidence file. Cliff had just committed trespassing and harassment, and I had it on video. I spent the rest of the afternoon pulling records I should have pulled 2 years ago, back when I first bought the house. HOA financial statements, which were supposed to be available to all homeowners but had never been posted online. I filed another CORA request, this time directly with the county assessor's office, asking for any liens or financial disclosures related to the HOA. Then I did something I'd been avoiding. I called a former colleague from my days in the fraud division, a forensic accountant named Maria Ortiz, who now works in the private sector. She answered on the second ring. "Evan Calder. It's been, 3 years? 4. I need a favor." I explained the situation, kept it brief, and sent her the financial documents I'd managed to access so far. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. "You think she's embezzling? I think she's doing something. The contracts are too consistent. No competitive bidding. Same vendors over and over. I need someone who can trace the money. Send me everything you've got. If there's movement between HOA funds and private accounts, I'll find it." I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat back and looked at the evidence wall I'd started building in my home office. Photos of the demolition, copies of the falsified violations, email chains, camera footage, contractor records, a map of the neighborhood with properties marked by violation status. It was starting to look like the case boards I used to build at the precinct, the kind that ended with indictments and convictions. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Sophie. "Can I come home yet? I miss you." I stared at the message, feeling the weight of it. She was 10 years old. She shouldn't have to be displaced because someone with a clipboard thought they owned the neighborhood. I typed back, "Soon, sweetheart. I promise. Just a few more days." But even as I sent it, I knew it wasn't about days. It was about making sure this never happened to us again, and making sure Jeanette Crowley couldn't do it to anyone else. The HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on Wednesday, held in the community center at the neighborhood entrance. I arrived at 6:55, parked in the back row where I could see everyone coming and going, and watched. 23 cars in the lot. Most of them belonged to people I recognized from Jeanette's inner circle. A few faces I didn't know, probably newer residents who hadn't learned yet how these meetings actually worked. Jeanette's Lexus was parked in the front row, passenger side door still open. Cliff was leaning in, talking to her, his expression tight. When he straightened up and closed the door, I saw his hands shaking. I locked my car and walked toward the entrance. The community center was a single-story building with fluorescent lights and folding chairs arranged in rows facing a long table at the front. Jeanette sat center, Cliff to her right, and 3 other board members I vaguely recognized filling out the rest. Lydia Penrose was at the far left, hands folded on the table, staring down at a notepad like she was trying to disappear into it. The room went quiet when I walked in. Not silent, just a drop in the noise level, conversations trailing off as heads turned. I felt the weight of their attention, but didn't acknowledge it. I took a seat in the 3rd row, pulled out my phone, and opened the voice recorder app. Colorado is a single-party consent state. I didn't need anyone's permission to record this. Jeanette cleared her throat, her voice cutting through the remaining murmurs. Let's begin. First item on the agenda, approval of last month's minutes. And the meeting moved through procedural items with the kind of speed that told me they'd rehearsed this. Budget reports that no one questioned. Landscaping contract renewals that no one asked about. A proposal to increase monthly dues by $15 passed with a voice vote before anyone could object. Then Jeanette's eyes found mine. New business. We have a resident who's requested time to speak. Mr. Calder, you have 3 minutes. I stood, phone still recording in my pocket, and walked to the front. I didn't bring notes. Didn't need them. 2 weeks ago, a contractor demolished part of my house without a county-issued permit. When I asked for the board resolution authorizing that action, I was told it was internal business. When I requested meeting minutes under Colorado law, I was refused. When I asked to see the violations my property allegedly committed, I received a list of fabricated charges that don't match the covenants on file with Arapahoe County. The room was dead silent now. I kept my voice level, factual, the same tone I used when presenting evidence to a jury. I've since discovered that the HOA has been selectively enforcing rules against properties owned by residents who don't participate in board-approved activities. I've documented 17 properties with identical violations that have never received notices. I've found 9 discrepancies between the covenants you're enforcing and the covenants legally filed with the county. And I've identified a pattern of no-bid contracts awarded to the same vendors over 3 years, all approved solely by the board president, without membership vote. Jeanette's face didn't change, but her knuckles whitened where she gripped the edge of the table. Cliff shifted in his seat, glancing at her like he was waiting for instructions. I continued. Under Colorado Revised Statutes 38-33.3, HOA boards are required to operate transparently, provide records on request, and follow proper procedures for enforcement actions. None of that happened here. So I'm asking now, in front of everyone, show me the signed board resolution authorizing demolition of my property. Jeanette leaned forward, her voice sharp. Mr. Calder, the board made its decision based on months of documented violations. Your refusal to comply left us no choice but to take action. Then show me the documentation. It's in our files. Then produce it. Right now. Her jaw tightened. She looked at Cliff. The files are at the office. I didn't break eye contact with her. You're the board president. You authorized a demolition that caused $75,000 in damage. You're telling me you don't have a copy of the resolution that gave you that authority. Silence. Someone in the back row coughed. A chair scraped. Then Lydia Penrose spoke, her voice quiet but clear. Jeanette, we never voted on this. Every head in the room turned toward her. Lydia's hands were trembling, but she kept talking. I checked the minutes going back 6 months. There's no record of any vote to authorize demolition. There's no record of a violation hearing. We never discussed Mr. Calder's property at any official meeting. Jeanette's expression went cold. "Lydia, you're out of line." "No." Lydia's voice grew steadier. "I'm the treasurer. I review every expenditure. And I've been reviewing the contracts you mentioned. Mr. Calder, the numbers don't add up. We've paid Lormont Excavation $47,000 in the past 2 years for work that should have cost half that." The room erupted. Voices overlapping. People standing. Questions firing at the board table. Jeanette slammed her hand down, the sound cracking through the noise. "This meeting is adjourned." I stayed where I was. You can't adjourn in the middle of a member's statement. That violates your own bylaws. She stood, gathering her papers, her movements sharp and controlled. "Security, please escort Mr. Calder out." There was no security, but 2 men in the front row stood up, both of them large, both of them regulars at Jeanette's events. They moved toward me, not threatening yet, but the intent was clear. I pulled my badge from my jacket and held it up. "I'm a police officer. Threatening or laying hands on me is a Class 2 misdemeanor under Colorado Revised Statutes 18-9-111. I suggest you sit down." They stopped, looked at Jeanette. She stared at me with an expression that could have burned through steel. Then she turned and walked out of the room, Cliff scrambling to follow her. The meeting dissolved into chaos. People are shouting questions at the remaining board members. Lydia was sitting frozen at the table. Someone is demanding a recount of the dues vote. I walked back to my seat, picked up my jacket, and headed for the door, outside. The parking lot was dark, except for the overhead lights casting yellow pools on the asphalt. I was halfway to my car when I noticed it. All 4 tires were flat, not deflated, slashed, deep cuts in the sidewalls, done with something sharp, something deliberate. I crouched down and examined the damage, then pulled out my phone and took photos. The parking lot had security cameras mounted on the light poles. I made a note to request the footage. As I stood, I saw it. A piece of paper was tucked under my windshield wiper. I pulled it out and unfolded it. Block letters, handwritten. "Drop this, or next time it's not your tires." I read it twice, then slipped it into an evidence bag I kept in my glove box. Then I called a tow truck and forwarded the threat to my work email, copying the sheriff's investigator assigned to my case. While I waited, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from an unknown number. No voicemail. I was about to put it away when a text came through. Same at an unknown number. "We need to talk. Lydia Penrose." I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed back. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Starbucks on Arapahoe. Come alone." Lydia Penrose arrived at the Starbucks 6 minutes early, wearing sunglasses, even though the morning was overcast, and a rain jacket zipped up to her chin. She ordered a black coffee, paid cash, and took a corner table where her back was to the wall. I watched her from my car for 2 minutes before going inside, making sure no one had followed her. Old habits from surveillance work. She looked up when I sat down across from her, hands wrapped around her cup like she was trying to draw warmth from it. Her sunglasses stayed on. I didn't push. People took off masks when they were ready. I set my phone on the table between us, screen down, recorder off. This conversation needed to feel safe. "Thank you for meeting me," she said quietly. Her voice had none of the steadiness it had carried at the meeting. This was the real Lydia, the one who'd been holding her fear in check for months, maybe years. "You took a risk last night. I couldn't do it anymore." She finally pulled off the sunglasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "I've been on that board for 4 years. I thought we were supposed to help the neighborhood, keep property values stable, maintain common areas. But Jeanette, she turned it into something else." She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small USB drive, setting it on the table. "Everything's on here. 3 years of internal emails, budget spreadsheets that don't match what we show homeowners, meeting minutes. Jeanette wrote herself, decisions she claimed the board voted on that we never discussed." I looked at the drive but didn't touch it yet. "Why now?" "Because I saw what she did to your house, and I realized she'd finally gone too far. And because I found something last week that I can't ignore anymore." She leaned forward, dropping her voice even though the nearest customer was 10 feet away. "There's a company called Meadowbrook Management LLC. It shows up in our budget reports as a consulting firm we supposedly hired for administrative services. We've paid them $47,000 over the past 18 months. Let me guess. Jeanette authorized the payments. Every single one. No contract. No board approval. Just invoices she processed herself. Lydia's hands tightened around her cup. I looked up the business registration last week. Meadowbrook Management LLC is owned by Richard Crowley, Jeanette's husband. There it was. The embezzlement I'd been circling, now confirmed by someone on the inside. I picked up the USB drive and slipped it into my jacket pocket. What else is on here? Emails between Jeanette and the contractors. She's been getting kickbacks. 10% of every job Lormont Excavation does, paid as a consulting fee to her husband's company. Same arrangement with Greenscape Solutions and Mountain Ridge Asphalt. They inflate their bids. The HOA pays the inflated price, and Jeanette's company gets a cut. I processed that, running the numbers in my head. 11 contracts with Lormont alone. If each one was inflated by even 20%, and Jeanette was taking 10% off the top, we were talking about significant money, enough to qualify as felony theft under Colorado law. How many people know about this? Just me. Cliff knows something's wrong, but he's too scared of her to ask questions. The other board members rubber stamp whatever Jeanette puts in front of them. They don't read the financials. They trust her. Not anymore. They don't. I pulled out my phone and opened a secure note app. I need you to walk me through the payment structure. Every invoice, every approval, every transfer. Can you do that? She nodded. I made copies of everything before I gave you the drive. If something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you. I met her eyes, kept my voice firm. You're a witness now. That makes you protected. If Jeanette or anyone else tries to intimidate you, you call me immediately. Understood. Lydia exhaled, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. What are you going to do with this? I'm going to build a case that ends with criminal charges, embezzlement, fraud, misuse of HOA funds, all of it. I stood, pocketing my phone. In the meantime, you need to act normally. Go to the next board meeting. Don't let on that we've talked. Can you do that? I think so. You can. You already did the hardest part. I left her there and drove straight to a FedEx office 3 miles away, made 2 copies of the USB contents, uploaded everything to an encrypted cloud storage account, and mailed 1 hard copy to my personal attorney with instructions to open it only if I requested, or if something happened to me. Chain of custody, redundancy, the basics of evidence preservation. By noon, I was sitting in my home office with the USB contents spread across 3 monitors, cross-referencing invoices against bank records I'd subpoenaed through a contact at the district attorney's office. The pattern was even clearer than Lydia had described. Lormont Excavation billed the HOA $9,000 for a drainage project in 2022. The same work, done by a different contractor in a neighboring HOA, cost $4,000. The difference, $5,000. Matched almost exactly with a payment from Lormont to Meadowbrook Management LLC 2 weeks later, listed as consulting services. I found the same pattern in 14 other transactions. Inflated bid, HOA payment, kickback to Jeanette's company. The timing was too consistent to be a coincidence. This wasn't sloppy bookkeeping. It was organized fraud. I compiled everything into a formal complaint, attaching financial records, email evidence, and a detailed timeline. Then I sent it to 3 places: the Colorado Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, the Arapahoe County District Attorney's Office, and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, because kickbacks counted as unreported income, and the federal government took tax evasion seriously. While I waited for responses, I turned my attention to Gabe Lormont. He was the weak link in Jeanette's network, the one who'd already shown he was willing to cooperate when pressed. I needed him to go further. I called his office. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice wary. Lormont Excavation. Mr. Lormont, this is Detective Calder. We need to talk. Silence. Then, I already stated the sheriff. This isn't about the demolition. This is about the payments you've been making to Meadowbrook Management LLC. The silence stretched longer this time. I could hear him breathing, could almost feel him calculating his options. I want to be clear about something, I continued, keeping my tone professional, not threatening. Right now, you're looking at a misdemeanor for the demolition, criminal mischief, maybe a fine, maybe probation. But if the DA decides to dig into your financial relationship with Jeanette Crowley and finds evidence of fraud or conspiracy, that's a felony. That's prison time. That's losing your contractor's license permanently. She said it was legal. His voice cracked. She said the payments were for project management, that it was standard practice. It's not, and you know it's not, or you wouldn't have paid in cash and kept it off your invoices. I let that sit for a moment. But here's the thing. You cooperate fully with the investigation, provide all your records, testify if this goes to trial, and I'll make sure the DA knows you helped. That can make the difference between charges and immunity. Another long silence. Then, what do you need? Everything. Contracts, payment records, emails, bitas, text messages. And I need a recorded statement about how the arrangement worked. When did it start? Who initiated it? And how much have you paid? When? Today. I'll meet you at your office in 1 hour. He agreed and hung up. I grabbed my recorder, my badge, and a blank affidavit form, then drove to Lormont's office in Englewood. The building was a converted warehouse with 3 excavators parked in the lot and a small front office that smelled like coffee and diesel fuel. Gabe was waiting inside, looking like he hadn't slept in days. We sat across from each other at a metal desk, and I walked him through everything. He confirmed the kickback arrangement, provided copies of payment records, and admitted on tape that Jeanette had initiated the scheme, promising him steady work in exchange for the consulting fees. He even had a recording on his phone, one he'd made after the demolition when he started to panic. Jeanette's voice came through clear, businesslike, almost bored. "Just do it fast. I'll handle the paperwork later. No one will dare question me." I copied the file to my phone, had him sign an affidavit, and left with everything I needed to prove conspiracy. By the time I got back home, the cameras had picked up something new. Cliff Morgan's SUV, parked across the street at 3:14 p.m. He sat there for 20 minutes, engine running, just staring at my house. Then he drove away. I saved the footage, added it to the case file, and sent a courtesy notification to the sheriff's investigator. Surveillance, intimidation, the desperation was showing. Jeanette's network was fracturing, her people starting to realize they were exposed. I checked my email. The Attorney General's office had responded. They were opening a formal investigation into HOA financial practices. Estimated timeline 6 to 8 weeks. The DA's office replied an hour later. They wanted to meet. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. The Arapahoe County District Attorney's office was on the 5th floor of a glass and steel building that overlooked the highway. I arrived 15 minutes early, signed in at security, and took the elevator up. The waiting area had gray furniture and a receptionist behind bulletproof glass. At 9 exactly, a woman in her mid-40s stepped out, dark suit, files under her arm. "Detective Calder, I'm Assistant DA Rachel Voss. Thanks for coming in." We shook hands, and she led me back through a maze of cubicles to a small conference room. 2 other people were already inside. A man in his 50s with a district attorney badge clipped to his belt, and a younger woman with a laptop open in front of her. Voss made introductions. "This is Senior Deputy DA Ken Morrison and Investigator Sarah Chen from our Financial Crimes Division. We've reviewed your complaint. We have questions." I sat down and pulled out my own laptop. "I have answers." Morrison leaned forward, hands folded on the table. "Let's start with the demolition. That's the most visible crime. Do we have enough for charges?" "Yes. Gabe Lormont has given a signed statement admitting he demolished my property without a county permit, based solely on verbal authorization from Jeanette Crowley. I have his recorded admission and audio of Crowley instructing him to proceed quickly and promising to handle paperwork that never existed. I also have security footage of Cliff Morgan posting threatening notices on my door at 2 in the morning, and written threats left on my car." I pulled up the files and turned my laptop around. The timestamp on the camera footage, the audio waveform of Jeanette's voice, the photograph of the threatening note. Voss watched the footage twice, then looked at Morrison. "That's more than enough for criminal mischief and intimidation charges. Let's talk about the financial crimes." I switched files, bringing up the spreadsheet I'd built from Lydia's data. Jeanette Crowley has been embezzling HOA funds through a shell company owned by her husband, Meadowbrook Management LLC. The company has received $47,000 in payments over 18 months for consulting services that were never performed. No contract, no board approval, no deliverables. Chen pulled the laptop closer, scrolling through the data. How do we prove the services weren't performed? Lydia Penrose, the HOA treasurer, will testify she never saw any work product. No reports, no recommendations, nothing. Additionally, I've documented a kickback scheme. Contractors working for the HOA were required to pay 10% of their invoices to Meadowbrook Management in exchange for continued work. Gabe Lormont confirmed this and provided financial records showing the payments. Morrison straightened. That's felony theft, potentially organized crime if we can prove ongoing enterprise. You can. I've identified 3 contractors participating: Lormont Excavation, Greenscape Solutions, and Mountain Ridge Asphalt. All of them inflated their bids. The HOA paid the inflated amounts, and they kicked back the difference. The pattern repeats across 14 separate transactions. Voss was taking notes now. What about Cliff Morgan? How deep is he in this? He's complicit but scared. He signed falsified meeting minutes and participated in intimidation tactics. But I don't think he was part of the financial scheme. He was following orders. If you bring him in for questioning, I think he'll cooperate to save himself. Chen closed the laptop. I need bank records for Meadowbrook Management LLC, tax returns for Richard and Jeanette Crowley for the past 3 years, and subpoenas for the contractor's financial records. If the numbers match Detective Calder's analysis, we can charge her with theft, embezzlement, fraud, and potentially money laundering. I'll draft the subpoenas today, Voss said. She looked at me. This is good work, Detective. Morrison stood. We'll move forward with charges. Jeanette Crowley for criminal mischief, embezzlement, fraud, and intimidation. Cliff Morgan for the accessory and falsifying records. Gabe Lormont gets immunity in exchange for testimony. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Once we file, we'll do it publicly. Press conference, the whole thing. I shook hands with all 3 of them and left. Outside, the October air was crisp. I sat in my car for a moment, letting the adrenaline settle. 2 weeks. 2. In 2 weeks, Jeanette Crowley would be facing criminal charges. I started the engine and checked my phone. A text from Lydia. Jeanette just called an emergency board meeting. Tonight. She says she's addressing false accusations. What do I do? I typed back quickly. Go. Act normal. Record everything if you can. I'll be there. I drove home and spent the afternoon preparing. I charged my phone, tested the voice recorder app, and reviewed every piece of evidence I had. At 6 p.m., I put on a jacket, clipped my badge to my belt where it would be visible, and headed back to the community center. The parking lot was fuller than last week. Word had spread. Jeanette's Lexus was already there. So was Cliff's SUV. And in the back corner, a white sedan I didn't recognize with county plates. Someone else was watching too. I walked inside. The room was packed. Standing room only. Jeanette sat at the head table, composed, her expression calm. But her eyes were different. Harder. Colder. The eyes of someone fighting for survival. I took a position near the back wall, arms crossed, and waited. Jeanette stood. Thank you all for coming on short notice. I've called this meeting to address rumors and false allegations that have been circulating. I want to be very clear. Every action this board has taken has been in the best interest of this community. Someone in the crowd shouted, Then show us the financial records. Another voice. Why did you demolish Evan Calder's house? Jeanette raised her hand. I will not tolerate disruptions. The board has operated transparently, according to our bylaws. Lydia's voice cut through the noise. Quiet, but clear. Jeanette, we've never operated transparently. You've processed payments without board approval. You've signed contracts without competitive bidding. And you've refused to provide financial records to homeowners who've requested them. Jeanette's mask slipped. Just for a second. Her jaw tightened. Lydia, if you have concerns, you can bring them up in executive session. No. Lydia stood, her voice growing stronger. I'm bringing them up now, because the homeowners deserve to know that $47,000 has been paid to a company owned by your husband, a company that's done no work for this HOA. The room erupted. Jeanette tried to speak over the noise, but couldn't. Cliff sat frozen, staring at the table. And in the back, the woman from the white sedan, wearing an investigator's badge, was taking notes. I stayed where I was, silent, watching Jeanette's control disintegrate in real time. The chaos in the community center didn't settle. It escalated. 3 more homeowners stood up, voices overlapping, demanding answers about contracts and expenses and violations that had been ignored or invented depending on who you were. Jeanette tried twice to call for order, her voice rising above the noise, but nobody was listening anymore. The authority she'd wielded like a weapon for 8 years had evaporated in under 5 minutes. Cliff Morgan looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he shuffled papers that didn't matter anymore. Every few seconds, his eyes darted toward the exit, calculating whether he could leave without making it worse. He couldn't. Lydia remained standing, her hands gripping the edge of the table, visibly shaking, but holding her ground. She'd crossed a line tonight that couldn't be uncrossed, and she knew it, but there was something else in her expression now. Relief, maybe even pride. She'd finally told the truth in front of everyone who needed to hear it. I stayed against the back wall, watching it unfold. This wasn't the time for me to speak. This was the community taking back control, and they needed to do it themselves. The investigator from the county, the woman with the badge I'd noticed earlier, moved closer to the front, positioning herself where she could hear everything clearly. Her notebook was out, pen moving steadily. Jeanette finally gave up trying to restore order. She gathered her papers with sharp, angry movements and stood. This meeting is over. If anyone has legitimate concerns, they can submit them in writing to the HOA office. She turned toward the side door, the one that led directly to the parking lot, clearly planning to leave without walking through the crowd. But someone blocked her path. An older man I recognized from 3 streets over, arms crossed, expression hard. "You're not leaving until you answer the question. Where did our money go?" Jeanette's voice went cold. "I don't answer to mobs. You answer to us. We pay your salary. We elected you. And you've been stealing from us." The room went quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence. Not confusion or shock. Certainty. People were done being intimidated. Jeanette looked at the man for a long moment, then scanned the room. Her eyes found mine, held there. I didn't move, didn't react, just stared back with the same calm I'd had since the day I watched her smile while my house was being destroyed. She broke first, looked away, pushed past the man blocking the door, and walked out. Cliff scrambled to follow her, nearly tripping over a chair. The side door slammed shut behind them. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then the older man who'd confronted Jeanette turned to face the crowd. "We need an emergency vote. I'm calling for the immediate removal of Jeanette Crowley as HOA president and a full financial audit of the past 5 years." Hands went up across the room. Someone called for a second. Another voice called for a count. Lydia, still standing at the table, cleared her throat. "Under our bylaws, we can hold an emergency vote if a quorum is present. We have 73 homeowners here tonight. That's more than enough." She looked around the room, meeting eyes, no longer the quiet treasurer who'd been afraid to speak up. "All in favor of removing Jeanette Crowley from the board and initiating a forensic audit. Raise your hand." Every hand in the room went up. Not a single abstention, not a single vote against. Lydia's voice steadied. "The motion passes unanimously. Jeanette Crowley is removed effective immediately." Applause broke out. Not celebratory, more like the sound of pressure finally releasing after being held too long. People were exhausted, angry, but also relieved that they'd finally done something. The county investigator closed her notebook and made her way toward me. Up close, she was maybe 40, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She extended a hand. "Detective Calder, I'm Investigator Amanda Price, Arapahoe County Fraud Division. I've been following this case since your complaint hit the AG's office. Good timing tonight. Intentional timing. When I heard there was an emergency meeting, I figured things might come to a head." She glanced toward the side door Jeanette had used. "That was a confession in front of 73 witnesses. Not a legal confession, but it's going to make the prosecution a lot easier when she refused to deny any of it. What happens next? We execute the subpoenas tomorrow. Bank records, tax returns, contractor statements. The DA wants to move fast before anyone has time to destroy evidence. We'll have formal charges filed within 10 days. She paused. You did a good job on this. Most people wouldn't have had the knowledge or patience to build a case this solid. Most people aren't cops. Price smiled slightly. No, they're not. But most cops wouldn't have stayed this calm either. You could have escalated this a dozen different ways. You didn't? You let the system work. The system only works if you make it work. She nodded, handed me a business card. If you think of anything else we should know, call me directly. And if Crowley or Morgan tries any more intimidation, I want to hear about it immediately. I took the card and watched her leave. The crowd was starting to disperse now. Small groups forming in the parking lot. People talking in low, intense voices. Processing what had just happened. Realizing they'd just taken down someone they'd been afraid of for years. Lydia walked over, looking drained but determined. I can't believe we actually did it. You did it. You stood up when it mattered. She shook her head. I should have done it 2 years ago. I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to believe someone could be that brazen. People like Jeanette count on that. They count on everyone assuming the system works. That someone in authority wouldn't actually break the law. By the time you realize they are, they've already done the damage. When Lydia looked toward the door Jeanette had left through. What do you think she'll do now? Lawyer up. Deny everything. Try to claim it was all a misunderstanding or bad bookkeeping. But it won't work. The evidence is too clean. And Cliff, he'll flip. He's already scared. Once the DA puts him in an interview room and lays out the charges, he'll give up everything he knows in exchange for a deal. Lydia pulled her jacket tighter, suddenly looking very tired. I keep thinking about all the people she drove out of the neighborhood, the ones who sold their houses just to get away from her. They'll never get that back. No, they won't. But the people still here get to move forward without her. That matters. She nodded slowly. Thank you, Evan, for not letting her get away with it. Thank you for having the courage to tell the truth. We stood there for a moment, two people who'd been strangers 3 weeks ago, now bound together by the fact that we'd both refused to look away when it would have been easier to stay quiet. Then Lydia headed to her car, and I walked to mine. The parking lot was nearly empty now. Jeanette's Lexus was gone. So was Cliff's SUV, but the white county sedan was still there. Amanda Price sitting inside on her phone, probably filing a report about what she'd witnessed tonight. I got in my car and checked my messages. One from Sophie. Aunt Claire showed me the news. They're saying the HOA president got removed. Does that mean we can go home soon? I typed back. Soon, baby. Very soon. Dad's almost done. Another message. This one from Maria Ortiz, the forensic accountant I'd asked to review the financial records. Got the full picture now. Jeanette's been running this scheme for at least 4 years, maybe longer. The total amount embezzled is closer to $85,000 when you include the kickbacks. I'm sending my full report to the DA tomorrow. This is a slam dunk case. I saved the message and pulled out of the parking lot. As I drove past the neighborhood entrance, I saw the community bulletin board. The same one where my name had appeared on a violation list 4 months ago without my knowledge. Someone had already posted a new notice. Emergency board meeting results. Jeanette Crowley removed. Financial audit ordered. New elections scheduled. It was printed on plain paper. No official letterhead. Probably put up by one of the homeowners in the hour since the meeting ended. But it was there. Visible. Public. The neighborhood is taking back control of its own story. I drove home through streets I'd driven 1,000 times, past houses where people were probably still talking about what had happened tonight, still processing the fact that they'd stood up to someone who'd seemed untouchable. My house came into view, still partially destroyed, still wrapped in caution tape and tarp, but somehow it looked different now, less like a crime scene, more like something that could be rebuilt. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a minute, letting the night settle around me. In 10 days, Jeanette Crowley would be arrested. In 10 days, she'd be fingerprinted and photographed and charged with crimes that carried real prison time. In 10 days, the system I'd spent 12 years working inside would prove that it could actually deliver justice when someone had the patience and knowledge to make it work. I got out of the car and walked to the front door. stepping over rubble that would be cleared soon, past walls that would be rebuilt. Tomorrow, I'll call contractors. Tomorrow, I'd start the process of making this house whole again. But tonight, I just wanted to stand here and remember what it felt like to watch someone who'd believed they were above the law realize they weren't. It felt like justice. Cold, clear, inevitable. Exactly the way it was supposed to feel. 2 months later, I stood in my driveway watching a different contractor's crew finish the last of the siding. The east wall was whole again. New studs, new insulation, new everything. You couldn't tell it had ever been destroyed unless you knew where to look for the slight difference in paint shade, where new met old. The November air was cold enough that the workers wore jackets, their breath visible as they worked. Inside, the house was warm. Sophie had moved back in 3 weeks ago, after the final inspection cleared us to occupy. She'd immediately claimed her rebuilt bedroom, spent an entire Saturday arranging furniture and hanging posters, making it hers again. This morning, she was at school. Normal life. Finally resuming. My phone buzzed. A news alert from the Denver Post. Former HOA president Jeanette Crowley accepts plea deal in embezzlement case. I opened the article and read it standing there in the driveway. Workers hammering behind me. Jeanette had pled guilty to 3 felony counts: theft, fraud, and criminal mischief. The plea agreement gave her 18 months in county jail, 3 years of probation after release, and restitution of $150,000, $85,000 to the HOA for embezzled funds, $75,000 to me for the demolition and repairs. She was also permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership position in Colorado. Cliff Morgan had taken a deal, too. No jail time, but 200 hours of community service, $5,000 in fines, and a guilty plea to falsifying records. He'd cooperated fully with the investigation, testified before the grand jury, and handed over every email and document the DA requested. Gabe Lormont got immunity, exactly as promised. His contractor's license was suspended for 6 months, but he'd avoided criminal charges. He'd called me last week, apologized again, and said he'd learned his lesson about taking someone's word over proper permits. I'd accepted the apology. He'd been stupid, not malicious. The article included a statement from DA Morrison. This case demonstrates that HOA boards are not above the law. When individuals abuse positions of trust for personal gain, they will be held accountable. We encourage all homeowners to remain vigilant and report suspected fraud to appropriate authorities. I closed the article and looked back at my house. The insurance settlement had covered most of the repairs. The restitution would cover what remained, and then some. But the real cost hadn't been financial. It had been the month Sophie spent displaced, the nights I'd spent building case files instead of helping her with homework, the knowledge that someone with a clipboard and a grudge had tried to destroy what my wife and I had built together. That part couldn't be restored with new lumber and fresh paint, but we were moving forward anyway. The neighborhood had moved forward. 2. Lydia Penrose was now HOA president, elected unanimously at a special meeting 4 weeks ago. She'd immediately implemented new bylaws. All board meetings are recorded, and minutes are posted within 48 hours. All contracts over $5,000 require competitive bids and full board votes. Quarterly financial audits by an independent accounting firm. Monthly town halls, where any homeowner could ask questions and get answers. The changes were working. Attendance at meetings had tripled. People were actually reading the financial reports. And the selective enforcement had stopped completely. Everyone followed the same rules now, or nobody did. I'd received letters from 7 families in the neighborhood, thanking me for not backing down. One had been from the older man who'd blocked Jeanette's exit at that final meeting. His note was short. "You reminded us we had power. We'd forgotten." I'd kept that letter, pinned it to the corkboard in my office next to Sophie's school photos and a picture of Sarah from our wedding day. A car pulled up to the curb. Lydia, getting out with a folder under her arm. She walked up the driveway, smiling. "The new siding looks good. They are almost done. Should be finished by the end of the day." She handed me the folder. Restitution check from the HOA's settlement with Jeanette. $75,000 as ordered by the court. I wanted to deliver it personally. I took the folder but didn't open it. "How's the neighborhood doing? Better?" People actually talk to each other now. There's less fear. Last week, someone asked a question at the board meeting about why we're using a particular landscaping company, and instead of getting defensive, we just explained the bidding process and showed them the 3 proposals we'd reviewed. Transparency is strange at first, but it works. It's supposed to work that way. Lydia looked at the house, then back at me. You could have walked away, sold the house, moved somewhere easier. Why didn't you? I thought about that, about Sarah, about Sophie, about every case I'd ever worked where someone with power had crushed someone without it. Because if people like Jeanette win, they keep winning. Somebody has to make them stop. Well, you did. You stopped her. She headed back to her car, waving as she drove off. I went inside and set the folder on the kitchen counter. Sophie's backpack was on the chair where she'd left it this morning. Homework half finished. A permission slip for a field trip I needed to sign. Normal things. Good things. Through the window, I could see the workers packing up their tools, the last of them. Tomorrow, the house would be completely mine again. Not scarred, not damaged, just home. I pulled out my phone and texted Sophie. The house is finished. Want to invite some friends over this weekend? Her response came back immediately. Really? Yes, can we do pizza? Absolutely. I set the phone down and looked around the kitchen. At the table where we ate breakfast. At the cabinet where Sarah's mug still sat on the second shelf. At the backyard visible through the sliding door, where Sophie used to play when she was younger. This was worth fighting for. All of it. Not because the house itself mattered more than any other house, but because letting someone take it would have meant teaching Sophie that bullies win if they're loud enough or have enough authority. And I'd spent my whole career proving that wasn't true. Justice wasn't fast. It wasn't always dramatic. But when you built the case right, when you followed the evidence and trusted the system to work, it did work. Jeanette Crowley was in jail. My daughter was home. And the neighborhood had learned it could stand up for itself. That was enough. That was everything. If you've ever faced someone who thought power made them untouchable, you're not alone. Sometimes the quiet fight for what's right is the one that matters most. Drop a comment below with your story. And if this reminded you of why evidence beats intimidation, subscribe to Karma Fence. Justice doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be thorough.